All right, everybody, this is a Timeghost public service announcement, the first one of the year 2021. So we're going to talk a little bit about the year 2020 and the year 2021. We're going to ask each other a few questions about the past and the future, and we have not prepared this, so we'll see what comes out. So the first thing, I'm going to ask Sparty something, and I'm going to hand you the mic. It's going to be like that, man. Now, at the beginning of 2020, we had Sabathon history, we had Between Two Wars was going, stuff. But on the world, specifically the World War II channel, we had the regular weekly episodes, and sometimes we had other uploads and stuff. But this was very much streamlined in the early part of 2020, so that we had 3 uploads a week, right? And it was even further streamlined as the year went along to a more specific writing, researching, and creative process, so we knew well in advance how things were going to come out and stuff. Can you explain a little bit about how that developed over the year? You know? Sure. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, so when we started out, it was really driven by resources. So how much could we produce per week? And it still is in many ways. I mean, it's thanks to the Timeghost Army that we're able to do it at all. And it was with the growth of the Timeghost Army that we could put out more content. But what really happened last year is that we saw a shift that has to do with the historical depth that we need to go into. So when we started the year, we were doing the weekly episodes, and then we were doing specials, and we were doing off and on, we were doing a War Against Humanity episode about roughly once every 6 weeks or so, and then specials and bios and whatnot. And what we saw as the year was going along is that Indy's weekly episodes got longer and longer, first of all, because there was more and more to cover. But we also saw the events and my series, War Against Humanity, getting more and more intense. And we knew this from the very get-go. So we had already decided by the time that Barbarossa came around that we were going to have to go up with a more regular schedule. It's a heavy topic, so we don't think that it's bearable to have it on a weekly basis. So that's why we do that bi-weekly. And in the same time, we continue doing the special and the bios. So that was basically what happened last year. Now, as we go into this year, we're still looking at how we're going to structure things to make sure that we cover everything we have. We don't want to break the mold on what we're doing. Indy wants to do his weekly episodes weekly, which makes sense.
Going to.
Yeah, and I want to keep the pace on War Against Humanity where it is. But the question is, how do we then cover as much ground as we can for all of the other things we want to do? And one of the things we came up towards the end of the year is to go away a little bit from the drill down to a more wide look at something within the war. So the example of that is the gallery videos that are now starting to come out. So we would do a bio of one person, but you have to think of that there's millions of people involved. And even on the high level, we're talking about thousands of people that are involved in World War II. So a gallery video is basically like a bio, but it focuses more on the role of the person. And by doing that, we can focus on more people within one episode. So this coming Saturday, we're shooting right now. This coming Saturday, for instance, I will be recording a gallery of camp commanders because of the Holocaust and the camps coming up. And Indy, you're doing one this week on?
I don't know which one I'm doing this week, but I know we did.
Oh yeah, you're doing one on a gallery of Quislings.
Oh yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, I'm filming that tomorrow. So I should
Yeah.
I just got so much on my plate, Steve.
Follow-on question within my question.
Yes.
Do you foresee the length of the weekly episodes to stay long, get longer, or get shorter?
Well, I can tell you, having written January and February 1942, that for January and much of February, the episodes hover between 2,500 and 2,800 words. And before Barbarossa, they were usually around 1,800, 1,900, and then they got up to the low 2,000s. They're going to get a bit shorter, but they're not going to be below 2,300 words so they'll continue to be fairly long and stuff. I had a side question that just popped into my head while I've got you. You said, when we were having lunch, you said that one of your big complaints from last year is that because of all the writing and stuff, you didn't have any time to read any books. So I'm leading into next year. So are you going to read any books next year? Is that going to be a big thing? Is that going to be your year of books? And if so, what are you going to read? Charlie Brown.
Well, I doubt it's going to be my year of books, but I'd like to get back to some of the classics, like Tour the knight Tour de Landry, who wrote an educational book for his daughters called "For My Daughters" in the 14th century.
That's not classic. That's beyond. That's before.
Of course, it's a classic. It has things. It has things like the dangers of fornicating in church.
Because that was like a big issue. That was a big issue. Apparently, the 14th century was a little wilder than you might think it was. But I'm gonna tell you something. I'll tell you a book that you should read. Many of you know from the early Middle Ages, the respected scholar, the Venerable Bede, right? He wrote a book. He actually wrote. It's a cookbook. Loosely translated, it's Good Dinners from the Venerable Bede, and it's one of his lesser known works. And because they have this. You guys are looking at me with fun. I'm not making this up, but they have obviously recipes of food, especially if you watch those shows like History Eaters and stuff. Okay, check this out. This is an onion recipe, right? Okay, you take an onion, just a regular, onion, right? And you cut off the two ends, right? Cut the onion in half, right? And peel just the outside layers till you're left with just the onion, and then you eat it. Yeah, that's it. That's what recipe books were like. Sparty, it's your turn to ask a question. I think we're only going to have time for one question each, though.
So, Astrid, what was the thing with World War II in 1941 that surprised you the most? What took you most off guard of all the things we covered?
Nothing. Nothing surprised me. What do you mean?
Nothing surprised. Nothing stood out as being like exceptionally like, wow, hey, hell, didn't know that or whatever.
Pearl Harbor.
Pearl Harbor.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
We learned a lot about Pearl Harbor.
We did.
Yes.
What did you like the most about Pearl Harbor?
Everything.
What did you hate the most about doing Pearl Harbor?
I loved it. No, I loved doing it. I could do that every month.
Oh my God.
I'm not asking you questions about the future.
Okay, tell me if you had all the money of the world for next year concerning Timeghost,
Okay.
right? What would you do?
You mean if I didn't have to think about, is this going to be popular? Or like it didn't matter if only 2 people watched it because it's a super niche thing, or it's super.
yourself.
I mean, because there's some super popular things. I mean, there's Stalingrad and El Alamein and stuff. So if I you can write in your opinions about this. I had an idea last year for a 10-part miniseries to do on Timeghost, which hopefully we can do one day in the future. That it goes from 1945 to 1984, and in 10 parts, they're like 5-year episodes. It covers basically the history, the development of the genre of science fiction, starting the day that science fiction became fantasy when the nuclear bombs exploded, and ending in 1984 when, both because it's a great year because of Orwell, but also when like Neuromancer and stuff and cyber fiction sort of changed the game again. And you really, each 5 years, you see completely different trends in that. And I wrote a little treatment section about the first 10 episodes. I think that's what I would like to do, even if nobody would watch it. But I think it'd be great, and I'd get to read a hell of a lot of really good books again, mostly to do it. That's a good question. I'd like to do that. No, but I would like to do. I had an idea for a baseball series, which most of the world couldn't care less about, and even most of America wouldn't care much about, called Dead Ball, which follows the Dead Ball era from 1901 to really 1919. It's year by year, but going through teams instead of just going through the years. Well, you asked me the question. You asked what I'd like to do. That's what I'd like to do. The Dead Ball era was an era of baseball. It was a period starting in 1901 when the foul strike rule was adopted, and really ending in 1920 when they banned all scuffing and trick pitches of the baseball, like spit balls and shine balls, and started replacing balls late in the game, and there's a lot more pop to the game, and Babe Ruth came along too. So, but I think it's a fascinating period of the game. It's very inside baseball kind of thing.
Sounds very inside.
I would make it interesting. I could read the phone book, and you guys would find it interesting.
I know.
That's funny because you're bringing up the area of sports, and this is something that you'd love to get into, isn't it, Astrid?
Yeah, that was my big plan for this year. Sorry. If we have the capacity, I would really love to do it. We even shot a trailer in October already.
Yeah, to things so we could start sending it out to people to see what kind of financing there is, seed financing to get it done, because of course you can't afford it with
and
what we got now.
Obviously, Indy would be doing baseball, right?
Yeah, but I could host several other sports that I have a great deal of knowledge about. I mean, American football I could host pretty well. I could host regular football, soccer, football, whatever you all want to call it.
Yeah, because the thing is, we might might look really nerdy, but the fact is we're actually real sports fans.
Yeah, and Sparty is a sports nerd in a different direction.
Yeah, I've even written a history of alpine skiing, and I'm a big hockey fan.
So that's still in the rough stages, but it's something we definitely want to do this year. Thanks for mentioning that. I forgot about that.
What event in the war do you fear the most from a vantage point of writing and covering in 1942?
Well, if you had asked me that about 1941, I probably would have said at this point last year, Pearl Harbor, because I wouldn't have known how I would have covered it. Like, I'm pretty happy with the coverage we did at the beginning of Barbarossa and the extra specials and the specials we did later and stuff. We didn't have to have all that on one day. That could come out over a while. The Pearl Harbor attack is only really relevant as it happens, because after that, then you've got to cover the attacks in Malaya, and you got to talk about the fall of Hong Kong, and you can't go back, like you could with Barbarossa. I don't think there's anything in 1942 that gives me pause like that. Like, if we hadn't done the Pearl Harbor miniseries, I have no idea how I would have covered it to really do it justice. No, I can't think of a single point that really gets it. When we get to the traffic jam, that's gonna be. I don't want to do spoilers, okay? Because I think a lot of people don't know what that is. The traffic jam. I'm not certain. Okay, that's the thing that most of all, I'm confident that we'll do it justice, but that's the thing that most of all gives me pause. How am I going to cover the traffic jam? Because you really need to visualize it, otherwise it doesn't make sense just saying it, right?
That's true.
And that's I can't just do that by saying about it. Okay, well, that's you got it.
I would like to ask you a philosophical question.
A philosophical question, okay?
Yes. What achievements came through the Second World War?
What do you
I
mean?
have a second.
You don't mean
I have
like
a
personal? It's like, well, Hitler's dead.
No, for humanity.
For humanity, well, all kinds of achievements came to the Second World War.
Tell
You
me.
gotta think of. I mean, once you start putting your industry on a total war footing, your technology is going to leap a decade ahead in 2 or 3 years. I mean, we saw more specific examples in the First World War of inventions or things that became a big thing. But just technology itself, the technology race during the Second World War is staggering. I mean, of course, you can't miss nuclear power. You can't miss splitting the atom and whatever good or whatever bad that could do for humanity and stuff. That's the poster child for technology from the Second World War. But when you think about, the developments in like radar and sonar and the developments of the look at how the jet engine developed over the war and things like that. You can't ignore that these are things that would have taken many more years, maybe not to make certain progress, but to become a thing, to become necessary in our society.
I have the next question.
Okay.
Do you think wars are essential for the development of humanity?
No, I don't think they're essential. I don't see humans not stopping having them anytime in the near future, but I don't think they're essential. I don't think. Well, one, I don't think that societies necessarily must stagnate without conflict, and two, does stagnation definitely have to be a bad thing?
Is stagnation
With
a bad
political
thing?
or technological?
Could you answer that? Because that would be really interesting to know.
I fully agree with what Indy just said. I mean, stagnation doesn't have to be a bad thing if you have reached a point before stagnation which is reasonable. I mean, settling at a point where people are free, happy, healthy, all of those things, there's nothing wrong with that.
Well, ask them, because this is a good question to end on it. That's an interesting concept. We think, when a society stagnates, it doesn't necessarily have to die. Why not?
But it would be
But
interesting
you
to
might
know.
disagree with me, so I'm curious what you guys think of both technological stagnation not or a moral stagnation, either in a morally pure or morally impure, whatever you want to call it, society. Think of different kinds of stagnation and what you would think of them as being a good thing or a bad thing or a neutral thing to society.
Latching on to to the question that you put to Indy, right? I mean, what did World War II bring? I mean, there are a couple of other obvious, more social ones. Human rights became a thing. Crimes against humanity became a thing. Yeah. Emancipation was forwarded and whatnot. But I don't know if the cost for that was really worth it. I would say that it probably would have developed anyway, but at a lower cost than what we had to pay during the 6 years of war. So I'm
8 if you're Chinese.
Well, yes. I mean,
so you don't write it.
I mean, for the whole period. I mean, emancipation, everything didn't just grow out of World War II. It grew out of World War I and the interwar era as well. But I mean, it was
grow for the Chinese for a while either.
The question is, still open. But there's a lot to be said for that. War does not necessarily bring development, but it just speeds development up. But I think that the area that you're looking at does bring development to a certain degree. And it led me to think of what we talked about earlier, the sport channel. What do you think is the thing that sport has brought to humanity that is the most valuable thing out of all the things that came with the event of modern sport?
I think starting with Coubertin, that we wrote a script about.
That is the founder of the modern Olympics.
I think sport gave a wonderful path, a peaceful path for different nations to face each other, because the subtitle is From Battlefields to Playing Fields. Do you want to say something? Yeah. Because I really think that was a solution for Coubertin, for the Olympic Games, to find a way that actually confrontation could be peaceful. Yep.
Now, I think that's a good place to end on the topic of conflict, here at the beginning of the very violent and conflict-ridden 1942 and the hopefully better 2021. This year is going to be bloodier than any year before, which might sound astonishing because 1941 was already very bloody, both in Indy's and in my series, but it's going to get worse. And I think it's really important to remember that we do this because we want to make sure that none of these people were there in vain, that they didn't die for nothing, and that what we talked about, the developments, that they really come to the forefront and not the bad things, but the good things that came out of their sacrifice. So it's important that we never forget.
On that relatively somber note, we should say goodbye and Happy New Year to all of our friends and enemies, because we're that kind of people, right? All right, from Timeghost, this Timeghost public service announcement is out for now. See you next time.